Okay, so last question, Kelly Mason, how to listen and lean into discernment when anxiety is so loud. I spoke a little bit about this earlier, but I just want to maybe dive in a little more with you. One of the biggest obstacles that we have, even the title anxious and avoidant is a little misleading because avoidant people are equally anxious, right? Underneath that avoidance is anxiety. They avoid to protect themselves from their own anxiety, right? So like anxious people are more obviously anxious, but what's operating under all of our relational barriers is some form of anxiety. And so, no matter which side of the spectrum you kind of lean on, what we are really confronting is our relational anxiety. And an anxious person has a tendency to let their anxiety kind of control them and push them into a relationship, where an avoidant person, their anxiety kind of controls them and pushes them out of a relationship. But it's anxiety no matter how you look at it. So, what do we do with this? There are a lot of strategies that allow you to manage anxiety. And some of what we're going to be going over in my 7-day challenge that I mentioned earlier, I'm going to be teaching you some of those tools and some of those strategies to manage anxiety. So if you want kind of a hands-on experience of that, join the challenge and we can do that together. But what we need to do really is first develop awareness in terms of recognizing what are my barriers. And when I say what are my barriers, what are those borderlines where when I approach that borderline, my anxiety elevates, right? When I ask for what I want from someone, or when I start getting too close from someone, or when I start feeling pressure from someone, right? Like these different kinds of things, these could be different borderlines that when I get to this place, I start to feel anxious. I start to feel very uncomfortable. When we were young as children, we did not learn how to process anxiety. Nobody taught us even about any of this, how to manage our anxiety. So like at a very early age, we started to experience anxiety, uncertainty, different forms of fear. And when we experienced that, what we learned to do was to push it down and be strong. Because we had to survive, and nobody was coaching us through our anxiety. So as adults, for most of us, there's kind of an automatic, when I feel uncomfortable, I try to push it down and avoid it. I try to distract myself, or I try to escape it in some way. What we need to do is start bringing awareness to those times, those situations when our closeness with other people activate anxiety. And then once we could say, okay, I know that when it's time to communicate a need, or I know that when I start to feel that someone is depending on me, or I know that when I start to become vulnerable with someone, like these are kind of my anxiety triggers. These are the things that make me very uncomfortable. I know that when I send someone a text and I don't get an immediate response back from them, that makes me uncomfortable. So the first step is just to become aware of your anxious triggers. The second step is to develop practices. Now, as I said, we're going to go over some of those in the challenge, but just to give you examples, practices like deep breathing, practices like meditation, practices like journaling, practices of just like consciously leaning into whatever's going to happen, I'm going to be okay. Like we underestimate the power of that, right? Like if we use the example, I sent a text message, I don't get an immediate response back. Now I feel anxious, right? So if we can actually walk ourselves through it and say, okay, what's going to happen here? Worst case scenario, I never hear from them again. They just ghost me. That's the absolute worst case scenario. Anything above that is better, right? So if I just mentalize myself, okay, can I handle the worst case scenario? Yes, I can. If they ghost me, what's going to happen? It's going to hurt. I'm going to feel maybe rejected. I'm going to feel unworthy. I'm going to have to go through a grieving process, right? Like there's going to be some processing to do there. maybe I'll need to talk to my therapist or work with a coach, or maybe I'll need some support. But like, if they ghost me, will I live? Yes. Will I be okay? Yes. So even grounding ourselves in our ability to handle whatever's happening. We've got to recognize that a lot of our anxiety is unconscious. It's not based in reality. So we feel like when I text someone and they don't text me back and I go, oh my God, if they don't text me back, I'm going to die. Like, that's what it feels like. It feels like I'm going to die. There's like a physiological response that feels like I'm fighting for my life. And so just consciously talking myself through that can be so powerful when I go, okay, I'm not going to die. My feelings are going to be hurt. I'm going to feel rejected. I'm going to need to process some things, but life is going to go on. And we can take a deep breath and we can just say, okay, if they get back to me, wonderful. If they don't get back to me, I'll live. And we can start to surrender into acceptance. Whatever happens, it's going to be okay. So that's what you do. And, we have different levels of this. For some of us, our anxiety is like all consuming. For some of us, it's not as bad. And so we've got to start where we are, right? You've got to start wherever you are right now. Like, I remember when I was younger and, by the time I met my wife, I had worked through a lot of this, but I remember like, I would just like, I would be like beside myself, like just waiting for a response from someone. And there were days when I would literally just be like, I'm going to put my phone down. I'm going to go do X, Y. I'm going to go work on a project. Like I'm just going to do something else. I'm going to leave my phone. So I don't know if they've texted back or not. And I'm just going to practice being okay without getting that text message. And it wasn't easy, especially not in the beginning. But as I got more comfortable with that, it started to not be a big deal. I started to realize just as easily as I met this person, I can meet somebody else. If they're not the one, I'm going to be fine. And all of these things were benchmarks. Like, I often say that if I had not worked through a lot of this stuff by the time I met my wife, I would have totally sabotaged that relationship because my wife was really secure. So I was too when we met, but if I had been the person I was a few years before when I met my wife, I would have totally sabotaged that relationship. Because she would have been like, look, I just don't think you're ready for the kind of relationship I want to have. So there's a need to start where you are. Work with whatever's real for you now. Learn some self-soothing practices. Learn how to kind of talk yourself through things, and practice this relentlessly. Make a commitment to yourself. Like if you're the kind of person who, maybe this is more of an extreme example, but if someone doesn't respond, you would start like blowing them up. Why haven't I heard from you? Where are you? Like, then make a commitment to yourself that I will never do that again. I don't care what I feel in my body. I will never do that again. Or whatever your patterns are, right? Just like make commitment. I will never do that again. And so when you make that commitment, you're kind of forcing yourself to find new ways of dealing with it. And yes, it's not going to be easy. It's not going to be comfortable. It might require having a therapist or a coach to process these things with. You might need to make an agreement with a buddy or a friend. Like, listen, when I want to do this, I'm going to call you. You're going to talk me off the ledge, and you'll have that friend be that support for you. But if you start with a commitment to rewire these patterns, and then you consciously work through that and you get some tools in your tool belt that support you, that's how you do it. And the more you do it, the better you get. The more you start to affirm to yourself that, you know what, I'm not going to die, the more naturally when it happens, you go to, I'm not going to die. I'm going to be okay. If they ghost me, I'll live. And the more you lean into that and become more solid in that, that is being secure. And even secure people It's not that secure people don't have any anxiety at all. Secure people experience anxiety too. They're just good at managing it.